Arise, transcend thyself. Thou art man, and the whole nature of man is to become more than himself.
A warm welcome to all Jaipurians and guests on the ninth day of spiritual retreat. How these 9 days have passed, it's truly amazing. Today, I invite our beloved, most revered Vice Chairperson, Anjali Jaipuria ma'am, who's the lady behind the planning of this entire spiritual retreat and the entire thought, the entire idea. We can understand that is her own deep connection from where she must have derived so much joy that she felt that joy has to permeate into each and every Jaipurian. And I can feel that. I'm sure, children, no one would do this for success. No one would do this for anything but sheer joy. When you feel that joy, you feel others should also feel it. So, with this deep feeling, I feel she started and she's taking us on this journey. Uh, I invite you, ma'am, with a lot of respect, humility, and we all look forward to today's session.
So, yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. It was sheer joy to see the children participating, to see the joy on their faces and the sheer joy on the teachers' faces. It was bliss for me. And I'm so happy that this has happened. And nothing would have happened without a team. And you have created such a beautiful team in the school. I think we're just blessed. Nothing, no words are needed to say anything. We just have to experience the bliss that is passing through all of us through these 9 days. Can't believe that the 9 days are over today, are going to be over today. And with such a gala closing ceremony. I hope all the students are going to attend, all the students who attended the spiritual retreat must attend the closing ceremony. Very, very planned. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So, should we begin with the topic that we have at hand? So, children, today we're going to talk on a topic that has hardly been part of our history books. Sri Aurobindo, the revolutionary. Sri Aurobindo, the revolutionary. How many of you students love history? Because every child doesn't like history. How many of you love history? Thank you, ma'am. So, a lot of children here love history. Now, who all want that your history books should be corrected? Because do you think what we are learning in our history is really authentic? Is everything authentic that we've been taught, that has been written down in the history books? See, history is written by the victor. And generally, the victor likes to write what they want the future generations to learn. Whether it is true or not true doesn't matter. A lot of part of our Mughal history, a lot of our history of the independence movement has been misrepresented. One of the greatest misrepresentations in our history is the fact that Sri Aurobindo's role in the revolution has been completely obliterated. Right? And I want the Jaipuria students should know the facts. See, Sri Aurobindo was the real soul of Indian nationalism. As we go through today's talk session, you will see what he has really given to our freedom movement and how did we really get freedom. What were his ideas, which were completely the game changers of the Indian freedom movement. What were those game-changing ideas of his? He was the vehicle of the voice of Mother India that stirred and electrified the whole nation. The whole nation, and within a period of 2 active years and several years before that, when he was just writing, and his writings were so electrifying that they just woke up the nation to the need of complete independence. And he changed with his writings in the beginning and then his active participation. He changed the entire existing political situation of the country. And unfortunately, this fact was not brought out by the Congress because they were the victors and they wrote the history books. You know, when we think about the life of Sri Aurobindo, it was nothing short of a miracle. At the age of 7, Sri Aurobindo was sent to England for studies because his father was smitten by the British. He was crazy about British education and he wanted his son Aurobindo to become like one of those British babus, somebody who's serving the British, who wears those coat and pant and becomes like one of those British. So when he sent Sri Aurobindo to England, he left special instruction with the tutor. What was the instruction? That my son should not know anything about India, Indian culture. He should not remotely be told about India and Indian culture. And despite this kind of education, removed so far from his very roots, from the Indian thought, when Sri Aurobindo returned to India, he was already burning with an enthusiasm and love for his country. He had already taken an inner vow to release his motherland from the shackles of foreign rule. He had already taken a vow even when he was in England. And he was in England for 14 years. It was a 14-year exile. Strange, no? This 14, the number 14 and the exile. For 14 long years, he had remained in exile from his motherland. During these years in Britain, he was brilliant. He studied Greek, Latin, French, English, and he was a master at these languages. And he also got acquainted with German and Italian, but that was just an acquaintance. He mastered Western philosophy. Leibniz, Immanuel Kant, Plato, you name the philosophers, Nietzsche, Descartes, all the philosophers. He just soaked up the Western philosophy completely. And he found his way to the deepest roots of Western culture. Towards the end of his career in England, he was instructed by his father to sit for the exam of ICS. What is IAS today? Was ICS, Indian Civil Service, because he wanted his son to work for the British. Sri Aurobindo didn't want to do that. He was very clear that he didn't want to do that. But to just make his father happy, he conceded for the same. And obviously, he was a bright student, so he passed everything. But in the end, because he didn't want to serve the British, so he didn't go for the horse riding examination, and so he never got it. He didn't have to serve the British. But the advantage of preparing for the ICS was that he got to learn his mother tongue, Bengali. So at the age of 7, he went to Britain. At the age of 21, he returned to India after his education. Now, Mother India at once recognized her son, her beloved son. And as soon as he put his foot on Indian soil at the Apollo Bandar in Bombay, he was blessed, he was greeted by Mother India with a beautiful spiritual experience. And you know what his spiritual experience was? He experienced like a column of peace descending into his whole being. It was a very powerful spiritual experience. And he put his foot on the Indian soil and this column of peace descended into him. It was just wonderful. This was the blessing that Mother India extended to her son while receiving him in her arms. From that time onwards, with an amazing speed, he absorbed the culture of India, the traditions of India, the spirit of India, the spirituality of India. With an amazing speed, it was like he was just soaking in. Within 1 year, at the age of 22, he wrote extraordinary articles. And children, you must write down the names that I tell you. You must look them up. You must read his articles, the year in which he wrote, what was Congress asking for from the British, and what was Sri Aurobindo saying. Big difference. So he started writing fiery articles on the existing Indian political system under the title New Lamps for the Old. New Lamps for the Old. Now, this young Aurobindo Ghosh, all of 22, fresh from English education from Britain, started writing about the deeds and politics of the Indian Congress. And with an electrifying vision vibrating with Indian patriotism, vibrating. You see, as I told you, history is written by the victors. And the victors write whatever they want to do. They completely eradicated his name from history books. But great historians, have you heard the name of Professor Haridas and Uma Mukherjee? So they and many leaders, the real leaders of the Indian freedom movement, wrote a lot about Sri Aurobindo because they were so impressed by him. Now, what was the difference between what Congress was asking and what Sri Aurobindo was asking for? Sri Aurobindo demanded a policy which was absolutely radical. The Congress was asking for partial independence, for a colonial government. The Congress at that time didn't believe in themselves. They didn't believe that they could really manage such a big country. They felt the Britishers had done such a great thing by giving us the rail, and they are so intelligent. We had lost self-confidence. And so the Congress was asking for partial independence, minor reforms. They were all working within limits which were abysmally low and pitiable. So what did Sri Aurobindo do? He poured in his articles a fresh voice, a bold vision that demanded a radical change in the policy of the Congress. This young leader, Aurobindo Ghosh, right from the beginning, challenged the moderate policy of the petition, and he made two things very clear. Two things. First, that the Congress must stand for complete independence of India, Swaraj, not partial independence. Not a colonial government is what we want. He said, we must demand, Indian Congress must demand complete independence, Swaraj. Secondly, what was happening at that time was that a few chosen leaders of the Indian Congress were trying to get independence. He said, no, India is a big country and the masses must be involved centrally. The masses must be involved in the freedom struggle. These were his two demands from Indian National Congress. His articles were so fiery, they were so electrifying that even venerable Congress leaders like Ranade were frightened. They were frightened, and Ranade warned the proprietor of that magazine, Indu Prakash, that if such articles were written further, he would face sedition. Can you imagine? Instead of trying to understand what India needs, they were just not happy that the Congress was being told by this young leader, Sri Aurobindo. And they said, we are going to prosecute you for sedition and we will have Indu Prakash completely closed down. Such was the power and force of Sri Aurobindo. Such was the power and force of Sri Aurobindo's love for his motherland. And that at the tender age of 21. In England, Sri Aurobindo had grown up entirely ignorant of India, her culture, her tradition, her religion, her spirituality, her thought. Now, when he came back from England, he joined the state of Baroda for service because you have to do something to earn a living. So he was working for the state of Baroda from 1892 to 1905 for 13 years. And at that time, while working for the state of Baroda, he more than made up for his deficiency of his knowledge of Indian culture, of his knowledge of Indian spirituality, this young leader absorbed the languages of India. He absorbed the languages of India. He learned Bengali, Gujarati, and Sanskrit. A child who has become 22 years old, not knowing Sanskrit. They say, this is what I have heard, I may be wrong, and Anmol ji can correct me if I'm wrong. He read the Nal Damayanti Samvad in Sanskrit. And when he read the Nal Damayanti Samvad in Sanskrit, Sanskrit came to him. The entire Sanskrit just came to him. And of what level his Sanskrit was. He could translate Kalidas's poetry straight into English, as if he's a Sanskritist who's steeped in Sanskrit. Such was his hold on Sanskrit. It is as if Sri Aurobindo galloped at the first stroke into the depths, heights, and widenesses of Indian culture. And he mastered with unimaginable speed the future, the truth and the meaning of India, Bharat Mata, Bhavani Bharati as he called it. Now, you students, when you're studying in your school and you're attending the spiritual retreat and you're doing physical yoga and you're doing your own meditation and you're dancing and you're learning music and you're learning and you're just doing so many things. Is it short of any tapasya? It is a tapasya that you are doing. And this is what Sri Aurobindo did. It was a tapasya when he learned about the Indian culture. Deep into the Indian culture, he dived into it. But he dived into it because he had a great motive behind his tapasya. That is why it is very important for us to understand that when we do something, we must always set a motive. Why am I studying? Why am I playing? Why am I doing these sports? I'm doing these sports so my muscles and the sinews and my body is full of energy and it is healthy and becomes perfect. There has to be a clear motive. So when he got into the culture of India, the Sanskrit and the literature that he read, the Vedas, the Upanishads, he had a great motive behind it. These were his years of self-culture, literary activity, because it was preparing him for his future work, which was very clear for him. He was clear that he had to get independence for his motherland, for his mother, for Bhavani Bharati. And for that, he was doing this intense tapasya of study of the Indian culture, right? And why Jaipuria gives you all these, the Indian culture, the Indian traditions, Sanskrit, spirituality. Why? Because this is your inheritance, my dear students. This is your inheritance. It is your right to get it. And if you do not get it, then we are taking away from you what is your right and inheritance and in your will. So this is the work that every educationist must do. And that is bring the students close to their culture, to their roots. बोलते हैं ना कि roots and wings. Wings तभी तो मिलेंगे जब roots है. बिना डोर की पतंग कितने दिन हवा में उड़ेगी. तो roots से बंधे रहना बहुत जरूरी है. Then later on he started writing in Bhavani Mandir. Write it down, my dear. First was New Lamps for the Old. Now the second thing that you should Google and read or go to Incarnate Word, Bhavani Mandir. Now, as he later wrote in Bhavani Mandir, he could not bear to see his mother, Mother India, being tormented by these wicked people. He wanted the true energy of India, Bhavani Bharati, to burst out from these chains, these fetters that were imprisoning her. These fetters must be broken, he said. And he realized, when does a country become feeble? When does a country become feeble? A country becomes feeble when her children become feeble. And what had happened? Because of these years of British education and the Indian roots had been taken away from us, The education, our Gurukuls had been closed. What was being taught to us? That you all are, what are you? Just fit to serve the Britishers. That was the kind of education that we were getting. So the people of India had become feeble. They had become sluggish. They had become timid. And because of that, Mother India had become sluggish, timid, and feeble. Distressed by this condition of India, he wrote in Bhavani Mandir, if India is to survive, she must be made young again. Rushing and billowing streams of energy must be poured into her. Her soul must become as it was in the old times, like the surges, vast, puissant, calm, or turbulent at will. An ocean of action or of force. When you are in the command of the soul itself, what happens? You can become calm when you want, and you can become turbulent when you want. And this is what he wrote in Bhavani Mandir, Bande Mataram. If India is to survive, she must be made young again. Rushing and billowing streams of energy must be poured into her. Her soul must become as it was in the old times, like the surges, vast, puissant. Puissant means powerful, calm, or turbulent at will, an ocean of action or of force. Sri Aurobindo started searching deeply because he said that if India has to become powerful again, where does that power lie? I have to find the sroth, the root where that power lies. And then Sri Aurobindo started searching deeply for that power which could liberate his mother. You understand that? Mother India, whose children were being uprooted from their culture. And ultimately, Sri Aurobindo found that power. He found that power that was inherent in the soul of the people, inherent in the soul of the country, inherent in the Atma of the country, inherent in the psychic entity of the country. This was his great discovery. He discovered that if yoga is done, you know what is yoga? All of you know yoga. Yoga means unification. If we get united with our inmost being, then the inmost being has that power to achieve anything that we want. Anything that we want. Sri Aurobindo found that one power that was inherent in India's soul. What was that one power? The power of yoga, joining together with our inmost being. He discovered that this special gift of India, that is yoga, joining with the divine, would give us not only knowledge, but power. Knowing that power was the real necessity for the liberation of his motherland, he decided to plunge into yoga. Day and night he pursued yoga, meditation, pranayam with only one pursuit. His focus was very clear. His focus was that I need to re-energize and revitalize my motherland. When he was describing his motherland, he wrote, who is Mother India? Who do we pray to? What is Mother India? Mother India is the soul of Bharat. Every country has a soul. And he says, for what is a nation? What is our mother country? It is not a piece of earth, nor a figure of speech, nor a fiction of the mind. The Shakti we call India, Bhavani Bharati, is the living unity of the Shaktis of 300 million people. See, there is Shakti inside each one of us. We'll be talking about it in the afternoon session. There is Shakti in each one of us. He said, the Shakti we call India, Bhavani Bharati, is the living unity of the Shaktis of 300 million people. But she is inactive, imprisoned in the magic circle of tamas. the self-indulgent inertia and ignorance of her sons. To get rid of tamas, we have but to wake the Brahma within. Though he came out openly into the political arena in 1905, he had started his work even when he was working for the state of Baroda. And he was working secretly even from 1901, just after Baroda. He was preparing a kind of action in India. And his action had two aspects. There was the public aspect and there was the secret aspect. The public aspect involved him telling Congress and telling the Britishers that we want complete independence, Swarajya. And he went about saying this to the leaders length and breadth of the country. And the secret aspect that Sri Aurobindo worked on was working for an armed rebellion, as a result of which India could be liberated, as a result of which British could see that there is a force in India which is not asleep, it is awakened. He contacted many leaders of India. He traveled the length and breadth of India. And it was why did he travel the length and breadth of India? To understand India at the grassroots level. What was the condition of India at the grassroots level? It was during these times that he met leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak. That is why we find such a tremendous resemblance between the thoughts of Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Sri Aurobindo. Tilak was best known for what pronouncement? Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. You see, at that time, for great leaders, it didn't matter whether their name was stamped on the thought of Swaraj or not. Sri Aurobindo, let's have slide number 5, please. This idea of the formulation of the spirit of the meeting, this idea that we must get complete Swaraj, this came about by the meeting of these two great souls, Sri Aurobindo and Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it. Right? This happened once there was the meeting between the two great leaders. I told you about these great historians, very famous historians, Professor Haridas and Uma Mukherjee. They write in their book, India's Fight for Freedom. They write, and I quote, Sri Aurobindo was, in the strictest sense of the term, a true prophet, pathfinder, and pioneer of India's freedom movement. Of all the statesmen India has produced, he had the clearest vision of Indian Swaraj in its fullness, as well as the practical means to attain it. He cast a powerful influence on the whole course of India's freedom movement, which had its culmination in the transfer of power in 1947, unquote. See, it is historians like these who are able to tell us the truth about the freedom movement that we had. They further said in their history book that in the political arena, he exhibited two distinct but inwardly allied personalities. Two distinct, but they were allied. What were they? As a passive resistor. I will tell you further what was he resisting. What was his other brilliant idea, which was never attributed to him later on. As a passive resistor and as a revolutionary. And in both the capacities, he cast a powerful influence on the whole course of India's freedom movement, which had its culmination in the transfer of power in 1947. Unquote. The key people in the Swadeshi movement, we must not forget these important names. Shri Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Shri Lala Lajpat Rai, Shri Bipin Chandrapal, Shri Aurobindo Ghosh, Shri Babu Jenu, and Shri V.O. Chidambaram Pillai. You know, it was the partition of Bengal in 1906 by Lord Curzon, which finally just made Sri Aurobindo's blood boil. And it finally gave Sri Aurobindo the impetus to plunge into open and complete political action. He left his high post in the Baroda College and he joined the National College in Bengal for a paltry sum of 150 rupees a month. But he had to come to Calcutta. He had to come to Bengal to carry his action forward. So he didn't care. He just moved to Bengal. He left the service of Baroda. But he did not remain confined to the college for long. And what did he do? Now, listen to me carefully, students. He formulated a program for India in which, on the one hand, there would be a complete boycott of British goods. This idea of boycott of British goods was hatched in Bengal. Boycott of British goods. And the second boycott, he said, should be a boycott of British education. The acceptance of only and only Swadeshi. When Sri Aurobindo started this idea of a graduated boycott in 1907, he was severely criticized by the Congress leader, Mr. Gokhale. Severely criticized. Later on, Congress took up the idea and it became the idea of Gandhiji. But actually, it was started in Bengal by Sri Aurobindo. On the one hand, he said, let us boycott all British goods. And on the other hand, he said, we must have a national policy of education. We must not have to go to British schools. We must study our Indian culture the way it was taught before the British took away the Gurukul system from us. From 1906 to 1908, 2 years as the editor of Bande Mataram, he charged the Indian citizens, old and young, with a zeal and an enthusiasm for their motherland, which was unparalleled. You know, the then Viceroy of India, Lord Minto, considered Sri Aurobindo to be the most dangerous man we now have to reckon with. These are the words of Lord Minto, who was the Viceroy of India. He considered Sri Aurobindo to be the most dangerous man we now have to reckon with. Sri Aurobindo was clearly an extremely influential and popular leader, very popular leader, who infused Indians with a burning love and self-sacrifice for the nation. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who barely gets a few paragraphs in our history books. Now, next slide, please. Let us see what Netaji had to say about Aurobindo Ghosh. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he says, in my undergraduate days, Aurobindo Ghosh was easily the most popular leader of Bengal. His was a name to conjure with. On the Congress platform, he had stood up as a champion of left-wing thought and a fearless advocate of independence at a time when most of the leaders would talk only of a colonial government. In 1913, Aurobindo was already a legendary figure. Rarely have I seen people speak of a leader with such rapturous enthusiasm. Unquote. Slide 10. There was another facet of Sri Aurobindo, a very beautiful facet. Sri Aurobindo was also the first national leader to define nationalism in the terms of spiritualism. In his vision, nationalism was synonymous with spiritualism. Next slide. In his article in Bande Mataram in 1908, Sri Aurobindo writes, what is nationalism? Nationalism is not a mere political program. Nationalism is a religion that has come from God himself. And so much, he's written a lot. He said, and I'm quoting Sri Aurobindo, if you are going to be a nationalist, you must do it in the religious spirit. You are merely instruments of God for the work of the Almighty. If you have realized that, then alone will you be able to restore this great nation. It is to the heart that God speaks. It is in the heart that God resides. Because of this capacity of belief, I'm quoting Sri Aurobindo, because of this capacity of belief, we were chosen as the people who were to save India. Such a people need not be politically strong, need not be a people sound in physique, need not be a people of the highest intellectual standing. It must be a people who can believe. He continues to describe the meaning of true nationalism, and he continued to exhort the Indians to live and breathe nationalism in their every breath. I am sorry, but I have such beautiful quotes from Sri Aurobindo, and I really want to read them out to you. Try to realize the strength within you. Try to bring it forward so that everything you do may be not your own doing, but the doing of that truth within you. Try so that every hour that you live shall be enlightened by that presence, that every faculty in you may be placed at the service of that immortal power within you. That voice and that strength is within you because God is there. And it is His mission. He has a work for this great and ancient nation. Unquote. There are many, 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 many writings of his. It was very difficult for me to choose what to put before you and what to leave out. It is with such electrifying words and unique vision that in a short span of 2 years, 1906 to 1908, he breathed the religion of nationalism, married with spirituality into the sinews of the Indian mind and awakened the Indian soul to its true spirit. So there's one more quote from Bipin Chandrapal. You all must have heard the name of Bipin Chandrapal. Bipin Chandrapal, enthused by the zeal of Sri Aurobindo's articles which he wrote in Bande Mataram, he wrote, its bold attitude, its clear ideas, its chaste and powerful diction, its scorching sarcasm and refined witticism were unsurpassed by any journal in the country. It was a force in the country which none dared to ignore. And Sri Aurobindo was the leading spirit, the central figure in the new journal. Unquote. From the moment Sri Aurobindo landed in India from England, his Swadharma was focused on winning independence, getting independence for his motherland, Bhavani Bharati. Now, after these 2 years of intense political activity, in 1908, the Britishers, so scared of him, threw him into the Alipur jail in a solitary confinement for 1 year. And what did Sri Aurobindo do? He spent that 1 year. It is not easy. His room was barely 6 feet by 4 feet or 5 feet. I don't remember the exact. You all must get yourself the book Tales of Prison Life. Please write it down. Tales of Prison Life by Sri Aurobindo, where he writes his entire experience of that 1 year. It is enthralling. It is unbelievable. Tales of Prison Life. It's a small, thin, very readable book. Now, what did Sri Aurobindo do? He's put into confinement in the jail. In that 1 year of confinement, he spent all his time in reading, intensive meditation, pranayam, and practice of yoga. He read the Bhagavad Gita, and decisive spiritual experiences came to him. You know, Sri Krishna himself came to Sri Aurobindo for days together in form. And Sri Krishna explained the Bhagavad Gita as he wanted Sri Aurobindo to understand it. In form, Sri Krishna came. In those days, Sri Aurobindo, because of his beautiful demeanor, was allowed to walk for some time outside his confinement room, the jail room. And when he used to walk, Sri Krishna used to walk with him, explaining the Bhagavad Gita to him. He later spoke of his gratefulness to the British Empire he was very witty. His concise words were, and I quote, "The only result of the wrath of the British government was that I found God." I repeat, the only result of the wrath of the British government was that I found God, unquote. While he was in prison, Swami Vivekananda, who had already left his body in 1902, he came to Sri Aurobindo for 14 days. For 14 days, Swami Vivekananda gave to Sri Aurobindo the knowledge of the plane of intuition. Today we will talk about the plane of intuition, which became for Sri Aurobindo a gateway, an opening to the higher planes of consciousness, from where he reached the plane of the supramental plane. In 1909, after his solitary confinement was over and he was standing in the courtroom and Chitranjan Das was fighting Sri Aurobindo's case. Someday you must read what Chitranjan Das said for Sri Aurobindo to the judge. You must read Chitranjan Das's words for Sri Aurobindo in the court. When Chitranjan Das was fighting Sri Aurobindo's case, Sri Aurobindo had the beautiful experience of Vasudevam Sarvamiti. Sarvamiti. He saw Vasudeva, Sri Krishna, in the judge, in the prosecutor, in Chitranjan Das, even in the bars of the witness box. He saw Sri Krishna everywhere. Just then, he heard that voice. He says, I heard that voice which I was used to hearing, Sri Krishna's voice. It was an Adesh, a command which told him, go to Chandarnagar. And he thought to himself, why is Krishna sending me to Chandarnagar? I still have to fight for getting independence of India. It was 1909. And Sri Krishna, in his Adesh, assured him that India's independence is assured. You have something else to do. He moved to Chandarnagar. He moved with a few fellow followers, rather. He moved to Chandarnagar. Sri Krishna had said to him that you have a greater Swadharma. Your Swadharma is not to fight for India. Your Swadharma is to create freedom, spiritual freedom, a spiritual growth for the world. And saying this, Sri Krishna sent him to Chandarnagar, where he waited for a further Adesh. And then he got a further Adesh to move to Pondicherry. See, he had to work for the change of consciousness of India and the change of consciousness of the world. His scope of work had increased, much larger work. Sri Aurobindo moved to Chandarnagar and then he moved to Pondicherry after getting the second Adesh, the second command. There, through his long tapasya, with Sri Krishna as his guide, he came up with the supramental yoga or the integral yoga of transformation. Sri Aurobindo's yoga is called the integral yoga of transformation, which is the way forward for evolution. He found that India's spirit is the spirit, the native spirit, the innate spirit of India is the spirit of spirituality. Now, Sri Aurobindo rose like a meteor, like a dazzling meteor in the political galaxy. And then he just moved to Pondicherry. He infused the Indian spirit, the vitality, with the spirit of sacrifice. He taught them Atma Samarpan to the divine will and the divine will alone. He pervaded the Indian soul with the quest to consciously evolve, to collaborate with Shakti and evolve, consciously transform yourself and evolve. He widened the Indian consciousness and made it more and more receptive to the divine love, to the divine will, to the divine influence. The goal of India is to exhort itself and the world with the imperishable message of the Rig Veda. Samgachatvam, samvadatvam, samvo manamsi janatam. Join together, speak one word, let your minds arrive at one knowledge. Vande Mataram. The house is now open for questions. We will try our best to answer your questions, dear students. Anmol Jainji is here, and I will try our best to answer your questions.
Ma'am, what Sri Aurobindo did in Baroda for 13 years?
Since he had not joined the ICS, so the Gaikwad of Baroda was in England at that time, so he had taken employment under him, and he was doing various things in Baroda. Finally, when he left Baroda, he was the acting principal of the college in Baroda. Before that, he was the vice principal. Before that, he was teaching French. He was teaching English. His students used to be absolutely in love with him. I mean, they just used to regard him so highly. People would come from far off places just to attend his lectures. And before that, some other things as a secretary for the Maharaja, several other things, because the Maharaja had understood that for a very small price, I have got a brilliant, brilliant man. So he was trying to get out of him as much as he could. Some of the speeches of the Maharaja were written by Sri Aurobindo. People would understand that, this is not Maharaja's own words. So, those who would probe, they would find out that there is one genius called Aurobindo who is writing the speeches. And he, as Anjali ji was telling, one of the major tasks which he did was to acquaint himself with the Indian literature and the Indian culture. And for that, Sanskrit is absolutely essential. So he learned Sanskrit and he learned it to such an extent that later on he even wrote the Secret of the Veda.
He even wrote an Upanishad. It's called the Sri Aurobindo Upanishad.
Ma'am, you said that some members in the Congress were actually like they did not want to realize that what Sri Aurobindo was doing was correct for the country. So, ma'am, can you tell me why was this? Like, why wouldn't they want Sri Aurobindo to just rattle the crowds with his speeches and writings?
In the beginning, they felt that we cannot rule over India, such a big country. Before the Britishers and the Mughals came, India was divided into different provinces, right? And there were different Rajas of different provinces. It was not one unified country. And they felt that India cannot be ruled over as well by Indians as well as the Britishers are doing. So they wanted a colonial government. They wanted a partial independence, where some things should be given to the Indians, but basically it should still be ruled by them. This was the view of the Congress. So when Sri Aurobindo came and his publications were spreading in India, he was becoming popular. There's always an ego game also. So there was this ego problem that somebody else is getting more popularity. And secondly, they didn't feel that we could actually rule over country. So they wanted only partial independence.
Ma'am, what do they mean by partial independence?
Actually, they were asking for colonial self-government, that they will have some sort of autonomy and some freedom to manage the country on their own, but they would still be part of the larger, the British ambit. They basically, what Anjali ji is saying is the fact that they were not confident, they were not believing in themselves that on their own they can manage such a huge country and keep it united. They felt that it is the British who were able to unite the country in the first place, and if they go, then we will not be able to manage on our own. So that is what is meant. And gradually, I mean, after the 1930s and 35, some Congress started participating in the elections also, and they started winning some elections, and they started getting little bit by and by, they started getting some say in the administrative matters. So this happened later on, but this was their aim. 1930, they declared that we want complete independence, and then they started getting some control in administrative matters. But at the time of Sri Aurobindo, leaders like Firoz Shah Mehta and Gopal Krishna Gokhale and Surendranath Banerjee, they were not really confident that they can manage the country on their own.
Mr. Gokhale was absolutely against boycott. When boycott was started in Bengal, Mr. Gokhale said, no, this is a wrong idea. We should not boycott the British. We want them on our side. So boycott was started in Bengal, which was later taken up by Gandhiji.
This is a very important point, that the 19th century in India, it was totally the higher class of India. It was anglicized to a great extent. Even Sri Aurobindo's father had come under that influence. So because of that, and the prevailing tamas, as he pointed out in the Bhavani Mandir quotation, it was so heavy that, you know, um, they had lost all self-confidence in the greatness of the Indian culture. कि ये कितना महान है, जो उसकी genius है, जो उसका innate genius है ना, spirituality, those things were cut off, and it was like only the British are great and this sort of thing. So the whole mindset was like that. And what Sri Aurobindo did in Bande Mataram was to, as somebody was writing in the comments, I read that he changed India into Mother India. He established the nation as a goddess to be worshipped, and that, and India ka jo main characteristic hai na, psychological, that is spirituality. And every movement in India that succeeds, ultimately it has to have its foundation in spirituality. Even Gandhi ji, he was looked upon as a sort of religious figure by people, as a sort of spiritual figure by people, and that was a major part of his success. Agar wo element nahi hota spirituality wala, his appeal would not have been so much.
I wanted to ask that, as you told that Sri Aurobindo had a very appealing charisma and his writings were very convincing. Ma'am, I wanted to ask that even though he was able to rally the support of the commons, ma'am, why was he not able to change the mindset and, ma'am, the thinking of the leaders?
He was. Finally, he did change the mindset.
Yes.
Congress started asking for complete independence finally. In the beginning, they were angry.
The answer to that would be they were influenced. They recognize the genius of what he's saying. They recognize the truth of what he's saying. But my dear, what happens is in the power circles, na, it's a lot about the ego also. कि ये मेरा आइडिया है, ये ऐसे होना चाहिए. मुझे पता है कि वो ठीक कह रहा है, लेकिन मैं उसको मानूंगा नहीं, क्योंकि वो मैं नहीं हूं. You know, that problem is there. So simple answer is human ego. Simple answer is human ego.
Ma'am, I want to know that in which form Sri Krishna and Swami Vivekananda ji came and to Sri Aurobindo, like in any form, or they were invisible, he can only hear.
He was hearing the voice of Vivekananda. This is what he has revealed in his letters. There is no mention of seeing the form of Swamiji. He heard his voice. As
for
regards
14 days.
for a fortnight, for 14 days, he was hearing the voice of Vivekananda. As regards Sri Krishna, the most revelatory part is in what is called the Uttar Para speech, and little bit is there in the Tales of Prison Life. He doesn't mention a form as such, you know, that he was this tall or this was his varna complexion or nothing like that he mentions, but he says that I was seeing Krishna everywhere. So it is difficult to answer that exactly what he was seeing physically, but it has to be understood that it's not a physical sight, it's an inner sight, and he sees that, you know, that divine beauty and that prakasha everywhere. It may be even that he was seeing the form of Sri Krishna. In his letters later on in the 1930s, he has said that you can see Krishna, you can talk to him, you can hear his voice, but he says in an inner vision which is as real as anything on the physical plane. So it is something on the inner levels. I'm sorry, I mean, I don't actually myself, I have wondered about this, and Anjali ji, I'm sure also, but we don't know because he doesn't mention the exact rupam of Sri Krishna.
So you know, these kind of spiritual experiences are not talked about too much. One should not talk about one's spiritual experiences. So he did write, but it was all a very veiled writing that he wrote, because you don't openly talk about your experiences. It's a love affair between us and God, no? So why should anybody else know about it?
Somebody has asked what he was doing for 25 years in a single room. It's on the chat box.
It was so beautiful. Anmolji would be able to answer it best.
See, Sri Krishna appeared to him in the jail in 1908, 1909, and Sri Aurobindo was growing in the Krishna consciousness for a period of 18 years. We can put it that way. And there is a certain date in the ashram records, 24th November 1926. On that date, Sri Krishna descended into Sri Aurobindo's body. And Sri Krishna was the guide of his yoga, whatever he was doing for human evolution. His yoga was never only for his own sake. Whatever he was doing for the sake of humanity and for the sake of the evolution of the earth as a whole. Now, what was he doing for those 24 years in a single room? People have been mystified by it all through, even now they are. What he was doing was that once the Shri Krishna Siddhi happened, he has called the level of Shri Krishna's consciousness as manifestation as something called overmind. Okay, just note this word, you can Google about it, overmind. The next level after that is what Sri Aurobindo has termed as supermind. So for those next 24 years, he was trying to bring down that supermind into the earth and to fix it there. That is what he was trying to do. That is what he was guided to do by Krishna. And once the Krishna Siddhi was complete, I mean, in simple words, he was trying to bring down the overmind. What it is, that again, we have to go into elaborate this thing, but that is the answer. And what is the supermind? According to Sri Aurobindo, it is the true creator of the world, and it is the consciousness which alone has the solution to all the problems of the world. No other consciousness short of that has all the solutions.
He used to barely sleep for hardly a few hours. All night he used to answer questions of the sadhaks, of those seekers, and in long answers. And I tell you, students, the most easy book of Sri Aurobindo to read, and which gives you all the answers, is, if you all can get for yourself, Letters on Yoga 1, 2, 3. I prefer the old version, because at the end of 3, volume 3, at the end of it, there is the indices, the index, where suppose you look for anger, then you'll find all the answers he's given to sadhaks, seekers on anger, or on jealousy, or on dreams, or on supermind, or on transformation. All the answers he's given over 26 years have been categorized very, very beautifully, perfectly categorized. So if you can get for yourself, those who are interested, Letters on Yoga 1, 2, 3. That is my recommendation. But a new version has come, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I don't think the 4th has the index the way I found it in my old version.
It's not there.
So I would prefer that you buy the old version, 1, 2, 3.
One more thing, I mean, since I mentioned the word supermind, it remains abstract if you don't say this. You can understand it as a consciousness which has oneness. In that, there is no division. Very simple synonym for supermind is oneness, in which there is perfect oneness. Below the supermind, there is no perfect oneness. And intuitively, we can understand that, like the Isha Upanishad says, Tatra ko mohaha kah shokaha ekatvam anupashyatah. We can reverse it. Unless we see the ekatvam, we can never be free from moha and shoka. And that ekatvam is there in its true sense, only in the supermind. Below that, it is not there.
I'm just trying to clarify my understanding.
Yes, yes.
So probably a fudgy understanding of this supermind and misconstrued and led people to believe that everything is predestined, right? Whatever you may do, it has already been decided.
Yeah,
because solutions are there, but you don't know them. So people, instead of working at themselves and finding those solutions and understanding the supermind, they started believing that everything is predestined. It's not in your hands.
Very true. There is an Upanishad, Isha Upanishad, uska jo 8th verse hai na, in that he says clearly, Swayam Bhuhu, Yatha Tathyato Arthan Vyadadhat Shashvati Vyah Samabhyah. The self-existent has ordered things perfectly according to their nature from time sempiternal. So आप जो कह रही हैं कि सब कुछ पहले से प्री ऑर्डेन्ड है, इनएविटेबल है, सब कुछ डेस्टिन्ड है पहले से, तो ये थिंकिंग इंडियन माइंड में सिंस द टाइम्स ऑफ द ईशा उपनिषद है. एंड दिस कैन लीड टू अ समवॉट फेटलिज्म कि हम कुछ नहीं करेंगे, भगवान ने ऑलरेडी सब कुछ प्री ऑर्डेन किया हुआ है, तो वो तो होना ही होना है, which is what leads to tamas.
But I would like to just give an answer for this. It's a very important point that you all students must understand. Suppose we believe that everything is predestined. Okay? Do you know what is predestined? Do you know just now whether you should have healthy food or you should have some junk? Do you know what is predestined? You don't know. So you have to make a choice anyway. Since we don't know what is predestined and we have to make a choice anyway, we might as well make the best choice possible according to the focus that we have set for ourselves in our life. And according to the choices we make, our destiny is opened. You know, our destiny awaits our choice. We'll talk a lot about this today in the afternoon. Our destiny awaits our choice. So thinking in the terms of everything is predestined is really like fooling ourselves, because we have to make a choice.
That's fatalistic. This is what Alokda was saying yesterday. This is a part from there as well.
I have the question related to those 24 years only. It is said that he did not step out from his room also.
Yes,
Yes, he did not.
he did.
See, these were he did not do it out of any some whim or anything. These were the conditions needed for his tapasya, and not even stepping out of his room till the time he had his leg accident in 1938. Very few people were even allowed to come and be near him or even see him. Champaklalji, his attendant, and mother, and maybe, yeah, as far as I remember, these were the only two people. These were the conditions required for his tapasya, and these things we can better understand as we become more inward and our consciousness increases. Mentally, it is not really possible to understand why he was doing this.
Ma'am, I really want to know that what was the connection between the mother and Sri Aurobindo. Ma'am, I really have some doubts. So, ma'am, can you please clarify on that?
Mother was uh, what is called in Indian spiritual parlance Sri Aurobindo's Shakti. This is the way. This is how we define their spiritual relation. She was his Shakti. What does it mean? She said, "Without him, I exist not. Without me, he is unmanifest." Sri Aurobindo said that all my work, whatever I wanted to do, it would have remained theoretical had it not been for the mother's arrival. So mother gave a concrete form, a practical form to Sri Aurobindo's ideas. She was his executive power, we can say like this.
Yes. How did he meet the mother?
Yes.
So, yeah,
So
you tell.
This is extremely interesting. It relates to Sri Krishna also.
Yes.
Mother, since her childhood, was having mystical experiences, even occult experiences. When she was around 13 or 14 years old, in her sleep, she used to meet a number of people who would give her spiritual guidance. And she noticed that with one of these people, the relation became more and more concrete, more and more clear. And she came to understand that this was the person with whom she was going to do the work, which was her mission of coming on earth. Okay. And the most interesting thing is that even though, imagine, I mean, when she was 14, it was like 1892 in France. And she did not know anything about Indian philosophy, religion, culture, nothing. But somehow, and this being used to appear to her in her visions naturally, right? And somehow she says, I was led to call him Krishna. She used to call this being Krishna, call this being Krishna. And when she saw Sri Aurobindo for the first time on 29th March 1914, the moment she saw him, she immediately recognized that this is the being whom I used to call Krishna. So that's why when later she was asked, she said, it is as if that our coming together and working for the same goal was predestined. She was married at that time to a person who was a lawyer and he had some political interests. So he had come in 1910. It's very interesting. Sri Aurobindo lands in Pondicherry on 4th April 1910. And this man who was mother's husband, he was canvassing for a friend politically. So he did not succeed in the political thing, but he was interested in yoga. So he sought out a yogi, right? And he came to know that Sri Aurobindo has just arrived. A great yogi has just arrived from the north. Then he had to go back. And then 4 years later, mother and her husband deliberately they came just to meet Sri Aurobindo. She has said this in an audio message. I came to India to meet Sri Aurobindo. So yes. And then she stayed for 11 months and then she had to go because the First World War broke out. And then she returned in 1920.
And in those years that she was here, she was doing so much work. All that Sri Aurobindo was writing was being published, and all that she was looking after. And the day she said that I have to leave, there was no reaction from Sri Aurobindo. He says, oh, I see. He didn't say, now who will look after my publication? How will the work get published? What will happen? Nothing. 3 words came out of his mouth. Oh, I see. And she left. Then she came back again.
Sir, can you explain overmind, sir?
Overmind in a single word is the delegate of the supramental consciousness. When maybe later on in your life, you will read Sri Aurobindo's literature, you will come to find Mother speaks of the birth of the new world. She says a new world is born, a new world is born, right? What is this new world? This new world is the world which is governed by the supramental consciousness, the consciousness of oneness. This world was born on 29th February 1956. This date is recorded, right? So the overmind, she says this was the old world. To answer your question, the overmind is a delegate of the supermind. It's like the prime minister, not himself going and doing everything. He sends some representative and he does the work. That is the meaning of the word delegate. So it is like a delegate of the supermind. The difference between overmind and supermind is that the overmind has the sense of oneness, but already in the overmind, the possibility of division appears. It is not there in the supermind. The supermind, even though it contains all the possibilities, it never loses its oneness. These things you can understand. I don't know. I mean, maybe you are already able to understand. There is a book called The Life Divine. There he has explained it in very, very thorough language. But if you, it may be difficult. For most people, it is difficult to begin with. What Anjali ji advised, letters on yoga. In that, there is a section called planes and parts of the being, right? So there is overmind is a plane among those planes. And in simple language, you can read what he has told about the overmind in that section.
Letters on Yoga is a wonderful.
Letters on Yoga. Somebody asked, what is the overmind? Are they familiar with the Isha Upanishad? Have you taken a session on the Isha?
No, it was too much to give to them.
Yeah, because they are familiar with the Gita.
In fact, in the Isha Upanishad, they talk of the Hiranyamayana Patra.
Exactly. That is the overmind. That golden lid is the overmind, which is talked in the Isha Upanishad.
Yeah. That and below it, but it's too much for the child.
Yeah.
In when he was striving to attain that point of overmind and supermind, so what practices was he doing? What type of meditation or tapasya was he in?
Yeah, it's a very beautiful question. Okay, so he began his yoga by doing pranayam that he began in 1905. And he was doing pranayam for 5 hours a day. He had learned it from a disciple of a yogi. And then he had, in January 1908, an experience of nirvana. How he got that? What is nirvana? Nirvana is basically the obliteration of the thoughts. The mind becomes still and the higher power starts acting through you. He got that by being with a yogi called Vishnu Bhaskar Lele, who advised him that as he sits in meditation, he will see that thoughts are coming to him from outside. And before they are able to enter him, he will throw them out. He was able to do it, and within 3 days, he was able to attain a complete mental silence. Now, this is January 1908. Okay. Then in the jail period, he had the Vasudeva Sarvamiti, the divine as everything, right? And what practices was he doing? Pranayam to begin with. His main practice, if you ask me, and that is what he has also taught, it is surrender to the divine Shakti. That is the main practice. He says yoga is not done by the human being. There's a sentence in his book called The Mother. In yoga also, it is the divine who is the sadhaka and the sadhana. The key thing in yoga, according to Sri Aurobindo, is surrender to the divine mother, to the divine Shakti. The more you are able to do this, the more she is able to pour herself into you, and the yoga automatically happens. Essentially, this is what he was doing, surrendering more and more to the divine consciousness. But there are certain practices mentioned in the letters. I mean, concentration on the Ajna Chakra, for example, that brings in more mental clarity. Your intuition power, thought power will increase. This is one of the centers where you're supposed to concentrate. You're supposed to concentrate on the top of the head. That connects you with the higher consciousness. This is called the Sahasrara Chakra, right? And the third center which he advises for concentration is the heart center. That leads to bhakti. There you will feel the presence of the divine in your heart. So mainly in these 3 centers, concentration. Otherwise, the main practice, if you want to put it, it was surrender.
One more thing I'd like to say, because in Atulji's session, there was a mention of Kundalini. Never, ever, ever let any teacher take you towards the practice of Kundalini. Never. It is very, very dangerous, and it can lead to absolute madness. Sri Aurobindo has clearly explained that, and he has said One should not try to open the chakras from the bottom to the top.
Yes, yes.
Never.
Yes.
The right way to do is what Anmol Bhaiya told you. Start from crown chakra, Sahasrar. Once you concentrate on the Sahasrar, or you concentrate here, or you concentrate here, you open up to the divine. You open up to God Himself, and God takes care of your yoga. But if you open up the bottom chakra, you get into the muck of the world. All the filth, the muck, and the negativity of the world, one gets, and even the greatest of gurus, some very, very past master guru may be able to guide, but otherwise one may get lost in negativity and darkness.
Important point here, since she mentioned this, the Kundalini is all about the Shakti, okay, dwelling at the Mooladhara, which is supposed to be raised up. But Shakti does not reside only at the Mooladhara. Very important to understand this once and for all. Shakti also resides above the head, above the Sahasrara. That is even the purer form of the Shakti, the higher form of the Shakti. And that Shakti is what is called the Divine Mother in Indian spirituality. So when you invoke her, so she is a conscious force. She knows how much to give, when to give, kitna dena hai, kaise dena hai, everything she knows. She is the mother of creation. So there is no disturbances. In the other way, best not even to speak about.
Not even to discuss.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I would just like to say two things. Ma'am, one thing that Alok sir yesterday also told us, that above the head is the Adhyatma, or the divine power that we can adhere to, or that we can surrender to know our inner self. Yes. And ma'am, second thing, that we had read this sonnet of Sri Aurobindo, The Hidden Plan.
Yes.
Ma'am, where he tells us that God has some greater objective for everyone. If we surrender to that divinity within us, He has some greater plans or objectives for us to fulfill. So ma'am, that is why we need to befriend that inner fellow inside us.
Yes. And this fellow inside is connected to Shakti everywhere and is connected to the divine. So what is the divine plan will be revealed to this fellow inside.
Yes.
We only need to become friends with the inner fellow. Then he will take us. Because he is the Hotaram. Remember? Om Agni Milye. Purohitam Yagyasya.
Devam.
Devam, he is the Lord. Ritvijam, he knows the right time. Devam, Ritvijam, Hotaram. He knows how to call. He can call the larger fellow.
Yes,
Hotaram, Ratna Dhatamam. He will be able to hold the divine joy, bliss, ecstasy when it is poured into us. Because we are unbaked jars, but he is baked. Right?
As Sir has stated, surrender as a very, very important sadhan. In Srimad Bhagavad Gita also, Shri Krishna ji has said about it at several places. Sir, I want to know more about surrender, sir, as it is conflicted with my ego. Sir, I'm talking about myself. So, sir, it is always conflicted. Sir, I want to know about surrender because, sir, I'm really the one to...
Number one has to be a little considerate with the human nature. The warp and woof of the human nature with which it is built, the apara prakriti, that is something called ahankara. Okay, it is shot through in the human nature. We have to understand this. There's nothing. That's how evolution has happened. Sri Aurobindo says ego was the helper, ego is the bar. Ego was the helper in the evolution up till now. Now it has become a bar. That is why we feel the need to transcend the ego, right? So surrender happens, first of all, understand, progressively. It cannot happen all at once. Whatever you can surrender, you begin with that and try to love the divine. When you concentrate in the heart, you feel this ahaituki bhakti for the divine. When you love the divine simply because he is he and you are you, for no other reason, that will lead to an increase of the surrender. And that one has to work upon. Wherever there is a movement of the ego in ourselves, we have to be vigilant. And we have to, put aside that movement. We have to consciously remove that movement. And by and by, the surrender increases. Slowly. I may even say that in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, the full surrender is said in the Mahavakya of the Gita, which comes in the 18th chapter. Before that, there is the whole preparation through the Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. But Sri Aurobindo, because he was beginning from where Sri Krishna left off, that's why he begins with surrender. So, there is a certain process also in yoga. So by consciously offering all actions to the divine, Karma Yoga, by having the right questions, existential questions, thinking about him. Who am I? Where am I coming from? Where am I going? What is the purpose of life? By meditating on these, the knowledge comes. And then when you realize that it is he to whom I am going, it is he who is the source of everything. Then the bhakti for him comes, and then the surrender really happens. So there is a process also, but one has to try for it. As we say, where there is a will, there is a way. Where there is a will, there is a way. If I really want to surrender to the divine, nothing can stop me. In fact, the divine is helping me to surrender to him.
Yes.
And one thing I just wanted to say, it's very important. See, these are students, and I mentioned surrender and Shakti and all this. Sri Aurobindo makes this very important observation in something called The Brain of India. It's a series of 4 articles written by him. He says, tell me one thing. What is the main reason why our rishis of old, they were such Vishala Buddhis? In the prayer to the Gita, Namoste Vyasa Vishala Buddhe. Why they were, Sri Aurobindo himself was a Vishala Buddhi of Vishala Buddhis, right? How were they able to have such huge minds, such great memories? What was the secret of it? What was the secret? The secret was that they understood that that energy which is moving the sun and the stars, it is the same energy which is moving me. That energy is called the Shakti. And yoga means basically to open yourself to that divine Shakti in such a way that you can contain more and more of that infinite energy within you. So surrender to the divine Shakti. That is going to lead to the, the true brain of India as it used to be.
So believe that Shakti is, believe in the Shakti, the presence of Shakti, then open to the Shakti,
yes.
Then call the Shakti, and then receive the Shakti. Believe, open, call, receive. And once you've received, hold. Be able to have that meditative power in you that you have called, and you're receiving the Shakti. But you must be able to have that patience to hold the Shakti.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Infinite gratitude. We can see how the children have enjoyed the talk. It's like opening up to knowledge. That's what the session has done, and that's what their questions and Anmolji's responses have led us into. And I'm so grateful, Anmolji, that you are there. It's a pleasure to see you. So once again, heartfelt gratitude from all the Jaipurians who are attending this retreat. Thank you so much, Anmolji, and thank you so much.